Good morning. Welcome to Digital Dexterity, a Kentico Insights vlog. This is a new video series we here at Americaneagle.com are putting on in order to showcase our wonderful partner, Kentico, and their DXP product and a lot of the work that we do with that technology. Yeah, I'm Wes McChristian. I'm our Kentico practice director here at Americaneagle.com. I'm actually, believe it or not, in my 13th year here with the agency. I always joke that's about a century in the tech agency landscape. You know, over the years, I've been involved in hundreds of projects. As an agency, we launch about a site a day, believe it or not. And we're doing this series, to help explore some of the solutions and just cool stuff that we built for other people. In hope that it provides some learning, tips, tricks, and, other benefits to our listeners. And I specifically get just really kind of fired up about, the solutions that we're building for our clients. How do we make a difference in their business? One thing I'm just love as part of the job is actually seeing physical business operations. Whether it's, a warehouse and how pick and pack actually happens, or, whether it's experiencing, a branch in real life. I've just always love tying physical operations and the reason that we're doing all of this digital work back to real business. In that capacity, I think, the name of the series, we've sort of decided on here to explore is this idea of dexterity. I think it's often confused with agile, and what is actually amounts to a method, right? You can't say agile without thinking about Scrum or Kanban. What we're actually hoping to explore is this idea of decision making and business process, and moving quickly to adjust our plans when maybe things aren't going the way that we want them to, or maybe they are and we want to lean in. This is how we're planning to talk about some of the maturity and the journey that comes with making these decisions in order to produce, real business results. So as this series progresses, hoping to unpack tips and tricks and stories, ultimately the narratives, what led to successful projects, successful implementations here as an agency. In addition, how others are using Kentico well and wisely in order to advance their own maturity. So we'll start talking about some of those dimensions, some of what maturity actually means here throughout the series. Here at Americaneagle.com, we attribute a lot of our growth over the years to the wonderful partnerships that we've formed with organizations like Kentico. One of the reasons we really like working with Kentico is we're just very aligned culturally. They're very interested in driving value for our end clients, and that, of course, is the name of the game for us as an agency. And recently, they've introduced some really neat tools that help to measure what they would refer to as digital maturity. Specifically, they call it their digital maturity model. And we think that's just such a neat idea, this idea that, as a web property or as an enterprise or as a small marketing team, that, you're on this journey of growth. And that growth, of course, is to drive business to the website, move the needle in terms of business operations, and ultimately collect revenue from the website, whether that's through physical business operations or digital transactions. And when we start to break down the digital maturity model, it's really quite neat because, I think it has a very systematic and, some might say agile sort of approach to growing your digital footprint using software like Kentico. And I think that's specifically relevant for anybody that's interested in digital marketing and some of the larger trends that come with tactics like PPC and SEO and, all of the modern ways that we might be driving traffic and top of the funnel activities. So this maturity model specifically sort of allow you as an end user to really, candidly consider where you fall on the map of maturity. Where are you in your journey, in other words? And I'll just list off a couple things that are present here. And I think as the series evolves here, we're going to hope to have some guests talk more about these things and dive into some of these topics to really give listeners a sense of what it means to mature across some of these dimensions, right? So a couple things are, what is the solution purpose? Why are we thinking about investing in a digital property? What is it for? Is it meant to be commerce oriented? Is it meant to drive leads? Is it simply informational? These are, very important dimensions for us to consider when we think what is the reason for evolution in the context of digital maturity, not just in content management. Likewise, what is our team size? Kentico does a great job of appealing in a very aspirational way to small team marketers. And in the same breath, it also fits very well with larger teams. Very extendable, very customizable. So if you have developers on staff, it's not just about the marketer at that level. And it's certainly a very important dimension of maturity when we start to consider, what does your team look like and who's going to ultimately be championing and supporting a given web property. Additionally, what size business are you? Are you small, medium size, SMB, enterprise? And I think some of that has great connotations in the context of localization, language, your geographic presence in some of the other regional markets around the world. The next dimensions is the idea of which channels your web property might be present in. The idea of design optimization for tablets and mobile and even apps. These channels and the way that you present content through to the end user, that has a direct impact on how you plan to produce that content, the experience that's derived by the end user or the customer, right, in the form of a CX or customer experience. Additionally, with teams is this idea of governance and workflow and potentially content approval. It's very important considerations when thinking about how do we bring our content to market for the end user. That's going to be relevant for a product inside of a catalog, just as it is in a media center or insights, something like a blog. And then additionally, how are we measuring all of this? How are we using analytics to understand our customer behavior? What information are we maybe collecting from a user journey? Kentico specifically is very, very good at inferring who your users are, especially in the absence of something like a login or a registration. We can score the journey of a given user and prescribe to them a certain amount of what I endearingly refer to as fake internet points in order to determine whether or not a user is qualified to be doing business on a website with us, either, again, through purchase or lead generation. And then I think some of the final dimensions of maturity that we'll see present here inside of the model, and we'll dig into over time with this series, is the idea of integrations, and not just the idea of headless or composable. We believe those are just features. The idea that there's an API that can be used to consume and disseminate content out to one or more systems, but also that as an enterprise, we understand you're going to have multiple systems, not going to just be Kentico in play. Financial institutions always going to have some sort of account management software for the management of, my checking account, my savings account, for instance. But also organizations like associations are going to have an association management system, AMS. On the manufacturing commerce side, there's obviously always ERP or OMS, other fulfillment and management style systems. Integrating with these systems into Kentico, is just a reflection of a specific solution that we would be recommending that a given organization move forward with as a reflection of efficiency. And that efficiency, of course, ties directly back to this idea of maturity. Some of the more modern, future-facing dimensions of the maturity model, also things like content personalization, right? This idea that, we're maybe collecting a certain degree of information about a user's journey and ultimately personalizing that journey back to that user because of what we might know about them. And, all of these things are very important to understand that as an enterprise, where do I sit on each of these dimensions? Because it then builds sort of informally a roadmap for how do we start charting a course to take another step down the path of maturity, grow our digital presence, and drive more business. As this series progresses, we're going to explore each of these topics. We're going to candidly try and empower the exploration that comes with reviewing your maturity exploring strengths and weaknesses, and ultimately making decisions that are going to move the needle for your enterprise. Uh, these conversations naturally become strategic and tactical in nature as we start to align different individuals or different methods in order to achieve business results. And as the series progresses, we're gonna have some of those conversations together to describe and explore what maturity might look like in the context of your specific business. If you find this content helpful, please be sure to like and subscribe the video. That certainly helps us out here. Gives us a sense of what you guys are all interested in. Of course, I can be found on LinkedIn. Happy to answer any and all questions there. We're also going to include a link in the video description to the digital maturity calculator. This is just a short form that'll give you, as our listeners, the ability to start to explore the strengths and weaknesses in some of the dimensions that I just mentioned. Happy to have a direct conversation with anybody that's interested there. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.